Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to today's Chief Learning Officer webinar. My name is Alec, and as always, I'm here today to help answer any of your general or technical questions that may come up. But before we get started, I'm going to cover a couple of things you need to know about the session today. There's no dial-in number for attendees, so all audio will be streamed to you through your computer speakers or headphones. Please adjust your volume there accordingly. You can submit questions at any point during today's webinar by clicking on that Q&A icon, which should be located on the right-hand side of your screen. Just click there, type your question, and click submit. If it's content related, we should have some time for questions, and we may pull your question during that session if time allows. So if it's a technical question, I'll have an answer for you that will appear on your screen shortly after you submit. So please keep your eyes open for that if you are experiencing technical difficulties. You can download a PDF of the slide deck by clicking on the handouts icon, also located on the right-hand side of your screen. Click there, and you should be able to download a PDF to take notes if you'd like. Also, feel free to jump in that Q&A session and let us know where you're joining from. We already have quite a few people in here, some folks from South Dakota, New York, Colorado, Florida, Connecticut, North Carolina. So please feel free to jump in and let us know where you're joining in from. Today's webinar is being recorded. You'll receive a link to the recording tomorrow afternoon. So about 24 hours after the conclusion of today's broadcast, please keep your eyes open for that. That will come from HCM Event. Please be sure to check spam as well. Again, that will come about 24 hours after the conclusion of today's broadcast. That will have a link to the recording and your HRCI and SHRM certification codes from today's event. All right, so in today's Spotlight webinar, we are joined by Casper Mork, the Head of Learning Technology in the Americas at Siemens. Casper has an established global career as a leader in the learning space. He has consulted on learning, training, and onboarding for large companies for years and has worked in the renewable energy sector for companies like Vestas, being responsible for global new hire onboarding as well as training for the Northern European region. It's our pleasure to have Casper with us. So with that being said, Casper, let's go ahead and get started.
Thanks, everyone, and thanks, Alec, for inviting me to join you guys. And so, might as well jump into it. Today, I'd like to talk to you about learning technology ecosystems. But before we jump into that and how you can build a roadmap for your ecosystem, I want to talk a little bit about the context in which I think about this, in the context in which Siemens thinks about these sorts of things. And that context and that backdrop is really what we believe is the future of work. And we're thinking primarily about the fourth industrial revolution. We believe that we are standing right in the front of, or if not being right in the beginning of, a fourth industrial revolution. And so, if we think back to the first, the second, and the third, we know what kind of change in terms of jobs, in terms of work, in terms of organization and society in general, that brings along with it. And so I like to read the World Economic Forum reports on the future of work. These come out maybe once a year, or is it every half year? I don't quite remember. But I brought out some interesting facts from the one that came out, I believe, in August 2018. It's a big boy. It's about 180 pages, something like that. I did read it all. I found it to be really interesting. But it does have some summaries that you can read through. Or you can just take away some of the things that I've listed here. I think there are about 5 key takeaways from this. One is the question of whether this change in the future, which is associated primarily with the rise of things like AI, automation, robots, and technology in general. The big question is really, what will it do to society as a whole? Will it create a lot of good jobs, or will it create more polarization? And the World Economic Forum, their report basically indicates, well, that kind of depends on our politicians and large organizations and ourselves, largely how we tackle this future. We can really go both ways. one surprising factor that I found in the report was that more new jobs may be created than lost. So on a global scale, it's estimated that 75 million jobs may be displaced by the shift in division of labor between humans and machines, but 133 million new roles may emerge that are more adapted to this new division. So I found that really interesting because most of the time, what we hear on the news is that the future of work is going to displace a lot of people, and truck drivers are going to be a thing of the past with self-driving trucks and so on. But this report actually indicates that we might have more jobs available than will be lost. So that's really interesting. But one thing that is clear, I think, from common sense, but also from this report, is that as learning and development professionals, we really have a monumental task ahead of us. It is estimated that by 2022, which I can't believe I'm saying it, but it's only 3 years from now, and we don't even have flying cars, but it's really coming up fast. But they believe that by that time, we will need to reskill more than half of all employees globally. And of those half, about 35% are expected to require additional training up to 6 months. So I thought a little bit about that. What we're saying is, so 33% of all my employees who need reskilling in the next half years, which are half, for me, that is about 120, 30,000 people who will need 6 months of training between now and 2022. So that's quite a bit more training than we do per person per year right now. I don't know about you, but in Siemens, we do maybe a week, maybe 2 weeks per person per year in training. 6 months in 3 years, that's a lot more than we're doing now. So that's why the headline for this one says it's a monumental task. It's a lot more training than we've done in the past if we want to meet this imperative for reskilling to match the requirements of future jobs. And so if we want to do that without creating enormous cost, we really need to create an ecosystem of lifelong learning that can cope with that sort of development where we need 3, 4, 5, 8 times as much training for our employees as we have done in the past. I can't just say, oh, I'm going to throw people into a classroom for 2 months or 1 month every year for the next 3 years. That's completely impossible. It would create a ton of cost. I may not even be able to scale up the amount of trainers and training organization that I have to do that. I need a scalable ecosystem of lifelong learning that can handle that sort of requirement for reskilling and training. And so that's where the learning technology ecosystem really comes in as something I really need to take a very serious look at if I believe the future that reports like these and others are painting, that kind of picture that they're painting for us. So a final remark from the World Economic Forum is that this window of opportunity to retrain and get ready for this future is closing quick. We need to be proactive. And if we are not, there is a high risk that those who are not proactive will fall behind to the organizations that are. So I hope it makes sense for you. It does for me to say that this is really the context in which I need to create a learning ecosystem that allows for scalability and can match the needs of the future as we see them here. All right, let's see if I can move to the next slide. What I did when trying to do the original research for this was think about the ecosystem that I was taught about in 5th grade biology. And what I learned back then, and I'm sure you may have recognized this picture from back in school is that an ecosystem consists of very many, very different elements working together. For example, you can have sunlight, photons, and heat working together with bacteria or insects or animals or even minerals or soils. So very different interactions between very different elements. That's I thought was a good reason for calling it an ecosystem in the first place, because as you'll see as we move forward, the way that people learn and develop happens through very different types of tools, processes, locations, and such. So that's why and I believe many others talk about this as being an ecosystem. And another reason for thinking about this in terms of an ecosystem and trying to go back to biology is to see if we can learn something from nature, learn something from those who have worked with ecosystems for a long time. There is a science writer called Janine Benyus who believes more innovators should look to nature when solving a design problem. She has a really, really interesting TED Talk on biomimicry, and it basically deals with how we can learn from nature when designing new things. We do not need to start from scratch always. In many instances, nature has already solved this problem ahead of us through millennia and millions of years of development. So there are three keys to ecosystem management from a very high level perspective. And you'll see that these permeates the design of an learning ecosystem as we move forward. One is the need for adaptive management. So when you're an ecosystem manager of, let's say Yellowstone National Park, what you need to prepare for more than anything is really change. Ecosystems change over the years, over the seasons, obviously, as winter comes, as the spring comes, and so on. You'll see tremendous change in the ecosystems, and they are wholly prepared and ready for that sort of change. In fact, some of them even thrive on the change that's happening with them. I think there's a valuable lesson to learn that you need to prepare for change, especially in a technology market and in a situation where we in learning and development realize that there are huge changes in the technologies available and the ways that people like to learn. We cannot create a static ecosystem because it will be outdated before we even get to implement it. So the adaptive management of ecosystems is really important. Another important factor is a strategic management. And in this case, strategic management means involving stakeholders. So when we created our new learning ecosystem, we tried to involve as many stakeholders as we can to get their input on what is necessary, to reach out to our stakeholders on the upstream, on the downstream processes of the ecosystems. That means not just our learners, but also management. It could mean our colleagues within HR. It could be different type of stakeholders out in the business, and try and get an understanding of what their needs are. It also includes people like maybe IT needs to be involved, but really getting people involved in the creation of the new and the definition of the existing, I think, is an important lesson to be learned from the management of ecosystems that have been done through the years. One thing that is to be noted is that a complete command and control approach to management is not really recommended, and in some cases simply not possible. Ecosystems have a tendency to evolve according to their own internal logic. So trying to control and really heavy-handedly drive direction for these types of things typically will not really serve your purposes very well. All right, so let's get a little bit closer to learning and development. I know I've been talking around this thing for a few minutes now. I have a definition here. It's from Mike Rustici, and he says, a learning ecosystem represents all the tools, technologies, resources, and places where the learning happens across your organization. And he says it really happens everywhere, and it's all part of your learning ecosystem. I encourage you to reach out to people like Mike Rustici and other experts when researching for learning, for technology developments, for whatever you're doing. Mike, for example, is one of the original creators of the XAPI standard, and he's also owner of the Watershed Learning Record Store. And he's an expert in some of these things, and I regularly reach out to these types of experts to learn something, and I find that they are often very open to having these types of discussions. So I took this down as a takeaway from someone who knows a lot about these ecosystems. Now, the traditional view of learning ecosystem, when depicted, typically looks something like this. So you try to put the learner in the center there, and then you say, well, we have different categories of learning. For example, on the left-hand side, you may say something is traditional. That could be perhaps documents and videos, CDs, maybe things like that. You still have that sort of thing. You could have self-paced and asynchronous stuff like mobile apps. Maybe you have web-based training, simulations, things like that. As we move towards the top, maybe you have your classroom training, the synchronous events, mentoring, hands-on, on-the-job training, all that sort of thing. As we move further to the right in this particular drawing, you'll notice that we're moving more towards the informal and ad hoc learning. So here we'll see things like the social learning, could be expert matching, could be perhaps social networks internal to your organizations. And finally, you could have the informal approaches like web searches. People simply go to Google, maybe they go to YouTube, or perhaps they search your internet. So this is a pretty traditional view of what a learning ecosystem is. But I think we have found that there are three very important drivers of the future ecosystem. One is the development of learning record stores like the one Mike Rustici did, Watershed, but there are also others, Learning Locker. And learning record stores are really, if you're not very familiar with them, they are platforms that allow you to catch and capture data about learning happening in your organization in a much richer and more user-friendly way than we have seen in the past. Also, what they try to do is centralize the capture of data for all of your learning data. So I don't know about you, but typically when I did reporting in the past, we would have reports coming from multiple systems. Maybe we had a learning management system report, but we may have had something on the side of that. Maybe someone used an external provider who also gave you a report, and perhaps you would also get some web statistics from your intranet to try and see what people were searching for. Or, you know, just multiple systems would sort of report disparately, and then based on that, you would have to try and pull it all together. The Learning Record Store tries to centralize the learning data that you have. It is also a system that is open to new standards of reporting like XAPI. And more generally speaking, we feel, at least in Siemens, that data is going to be really, really important going forward in the learning space. As we are able to capture more data, as we're getting better at analyzing data, as we're better at centralizing data, we will be able to make decisions based on data a lot more prevalent than they are today. Generally, we think that we will see a revolution in how learning is becoming more data-driven than it has been in the past, in much the same way as marketing has changed from being a uh, gut feel sort of approach of what works and what doesn't work into becoming a very, very data-oriented discipline of click rates and bounce rates and conversion rates that really drive all of marketing as we see it today. So we believe that we will see a similar change in the learning and development space as we have in the marketing space. So that's one important driver: data, learning record stores, and our ability to capture and make decisions based on that data. The second thing we think are really connectors. As I said before, um, many of us have several different systems and disparate platforms that that really don't talk very much to each other. And we believe that going forward, we will see many more connections between those systems. We will also see new types of connectors like the XAPI standard, which, if you're not familiar with it, it is sort of the next step of SCORM. And if you're not familiar with SCORM, I know some of you are probably very, very familiar with the SCORM standard, but if you're not, that is basically a standard that allows for e-learning to report completions and things like that into your LMS. And so XAPI is the next step in the ability for e-learning and other electronic learning to report completion, but not only completion, but also activity in a much richer way than we've seen in the past. So we believe that the second important driver is connections between systems, not only driving better data, but also driving a better user experience. The third important driver is this area of user experience. You know, for many, many years, the systems that have been created in the learning and development space, like the learning management system, the LMS, has primarily been developed for someone like me, a learning technology manager, or the learning administrative teams. And it has made life a lot better for me and for the learning administrators, because they can now administrate, manage training, learning. We can assign courses to user groups, and we can all do all these sorts of things. And that's where the focus has been for 15 to 20 years, making life easier for someone like me. And what happened was that we forgot about the learner in that process. So I don't know how many people on this call can really say, my learners love my LMS. I mean, how many people have had someone reach out to you and say, oh, we love your LMS. It's such a wonderful experience. It just doesn't happen, does it? And I think that's what has changed recently. There have been vendors who have seen this gap in the technology space of learning and development, and they've noticed no one is focusing on the learner in this space. So now what has happened, of course, is that everyone is focusing on the experience of the learner, and mostly so those who call themselves learning experience platforms. The vendors in this space are organizations like Degreed, Edcast, Fuse, and a few others. But those are the most prevalent in this space. And what they try to do is really create that Netflix experience of learning, where they connect all of your systems, whether it's your HR information system, your learning management system, perhaps elements from your intranet, and even external, very informal sources of learning like YouTube, TED Talks, it could be a CLO Magazine if you wanted that, can be fed into that learning experience platform. And then using some of the same algorithms that Amazon used, the same algorithms that Netflix uses, or Pandora, or some of your other music and streaming services, to serve content that hopefully is relevant, particularly for you as an individual. I think not just learning experience platforms, but this change in focus from focusing on serving the learning and development professionals to serving the learners is a significant change that drives how we develop and focus on our ecosystem going forward. So as a result of that, if we really talk about the future of an ecosystem, we believe it will look something like what you see here. We still have that traditional view of all our learning resources, that picture you saw just before. It's part of the puzzle, but it's not the only part of the puzzle. With the connectors that we have in place or that can be made, we can connect systems like safety records perhaps into our ecosystem, so that we can have a look and see, well, is there any correlation between our safety records and our safety training? Do we see a difference in our safety records between those organizations within our business that focus more on safety than those who do less? What about individual courses? Can we see an impact? But the same goes not just for safety records. It could be Salesforce information. It could be your business KPI system. It could be your net promoter scores, your performance metrics from your talent management system. It could be your quality metrics. It could even be equipment SCADA. So information about, if you're a product-oriented company like ours, for example, Siemens, we create everything from medical scanners to wind turbines, gas turbines, trains. We can get data about how they perform in the real world, and we can potentially relate it to the training and development efforts that we have. So we can perhaps see, is there a difference in the ability or the performance, sorry, of our wind turbines that are serviced by wind service technicians who have been trained in a certain way? So that's what we mean when we say things can be more data-driven, by making these connections between our different systems. As you can see around all of these puzzle pieces, you'll see that learning record store and other data analytics tools that hopefully will allow us to make much better decisions and get much better information on things like ROI and performance of our learning and development initiatives. And then on the front end, we see this learning experience platform of whatever kind that really does everything it can to focus on serving up content that is supremely relevant for the learner exactly when they need it, to try and deliver learning and development solutions into the flow of work for people, and also serve it up in a way that they've come to expect. When you look at how you usually interact with major applications in your everyday life, whether that's Amazon or Facebook or Instagram or maybe some phone apps or whatever you use in your daily life, and then compare it to the tools and systems that you see in your learning and development environment, there is a gap there, and that's the kind of gap that we would like to see if we can close. And that's why we think that this learning experience platform has a role in the future. So what we did based on all of these thoughts, based on these ideas, based on this research, was we said, all right, we need to prepare for the future. We need to create a roadmap for our future ecosystem. And so the next couple of slides, I'll try and go through the steps that we took to create our future system. So the first thing we did was try to map out that first slide of a learning ecosystem that I showed you, mapping out the formal and informal places, systems, and channels of learning that our learners currently have. So we obviously have classroom ILTs, we have WBTs, we have documents, we have videos. We know that people go to our LMS. We have platforms like our SharePoint. We also have informal places, and this is where some of the interesting stuff comes up, because people learn everywhere these days. YouTube is supremely interesting in learning, and if you think about your private life, how many of you have learned something by going to YouTube within the last month, or even perhaps within the last week? I know that I use it quite a bit, but also social networks, asking your friends over the web. User-generated content is a big piece that we're seeing explode in Siemens. We have our own video channel internally where people can create videos and upload them. We also have democratized the approach to creating learning. So we have tools that allows everyone to create an e-learning, on-the-job coaching and intranet and so on. So what we started doing was try to identify and then list all of these places and systems and approaches to learning that we could think of right now. And then we wanted to map our current ecosystem, and mapping it out can be done in a number of different ways. Some a little bit boring. Maybe you want to use a PowerPoint. Maybe you want to get in a workshop environment and use Post-it notes. Maybe you want to get really creative and use Lego Serious Play, simply building the different tools and processes and channels of learning. We went a relatively traditional way and used Post-it notes. And what you come up with when you try to identify your existing connection and your existing ecosystem is something that looks a little bit like that. I had to turn this into a PowerPoint for the purposes of this presentation, but I could have showed you a picture of a wall filled with Post-it notes that each said, oh, this is a learning channel. So these are some of them. They're not all of them, but it could be social media, could be virtual reality, artificial reality. It could be e-learning. You have your support systems like your HRIS systems that are connected to your LMS and YouTube and intranet and so on. And so the first step is really to try and map out what does your as-is look like. And you can see here that in our case, we really didn't have very many connections between these different systems. They were out there, but they were floating independently of each other. And then the second step for us, and as we move forward here, you'll notice that this is not a really revolutionary approach to building something. It is really, luckily, it's an easy and well-known process. You don't really have to do anything revolutionary to map out your future learning ecosystem or your roadmap. The next step, of course, after you've done your as-is to create your to-be. So that is a question of identifying the future connections. Where do you want connections between your existing channels, but also what kind of missing pieces did you identify in your existing ecosystem? For us, for example, we did have a learning experience platform, but it was not as solid as we would like it to be, so we're considering a new one. We also found that we want to work more with the LRS. So as an example here, you see that those are in purple. Those are net new additions to our ecosystem. And you also see many of these connection arrows here go both ways. So for example, we would like for there to be a double connection between our LMS and our learning experience platform. We want our social media connected to our platform. We want virtual reality and augmented reality connected. We want micro learning. Maybe you identified a new e-learning vendor. Maybe you want YouTube connected directly, and many other things is what you can do here in your to-be. So once you have your as is and your to-be, you know, it's probably no surprise to you that you now have pretty much a delta of what you need in terms of platforms, in terms of resources. Maybe you want a learning record store. You think you want to focus more on becoming data driven. Maybe you want to focus on the learning experience platform. Maybe a social network, but again, this could, of course, be many things that you want it to do. On top of that, there are these connections, the little arrows. We believe those are really important, that those connections really are established. It could be an API into YouTube. It could be XAPI for your training records, so you get richer data about how people complete their e-learning. It could be maybe just a flat file, like a comma separated value file dump from your VR out platforms or other systems. It doesn't need to be fancy IT connections. It could be simple reporting going back and forth every week or other week or monthly even. Perhaps you want to improve your HRIS feed. Maybe you want to include job levels. Maybe you want to get data from your talent management systems about performance metrics and see if you can use that to pinpoint what kind of training individuals should have. But again, this is going to be individual for each of you in your organization. And then from there on out, it's really pretty much a question of project management. Once you have that delta of, well, we need a new LMS, or we need a new learning experience platform, or we need some connections. Well, once you know that, it becomes a matter of project management. Get it done, get it purchased, get it into some sort of a process where you go from 0 to 100. So the benefits that we try to realize and what we think we'll realize with our future learning ecosystem that is not fully in place. It may never be. Like I said in the beginning, these things have to be adaptive, which means it's never really done. We will create new connections. Old systems will be discontinued. New ones will be added. And we try to make sure that the system stays open and easy to adapt. But we think we're going to get out of it. A lot of it is related to data. We think that we can learn a lot from the data, and I think we'll get a lot better at impact measurement by linking the business data and the learning data. It should become a lot easier to map correlations or even causations between learning and business outcomes, which is, in some cases, ROI. So we think we'll get a lot better on that. We also think that using AI and data analytics will be important for us to pinpoint where the needs are, what works and what doesn't. The other big benefit we think will and hope we'll get out of this is user engagement. By really focusing on that learner experience, we're hoping to really engage and drive more learning through our systems. These integrations and these connections between systems reduces the need for multiple logins. It makes it easier to be a learner. The user interface itself gets a lot of improvement. Hopefully that will lead to more usage. And what we've noticed, by the way, is that user experience design skills are necessary in this new paradigm of learning technology. So that's basically my presentation for today, and I want to open it up for so that we have enough time for questions and comments. And I'm also always happy to connect with you guys on LinkedIn. It's always interesting to see what other people are doing and connect whenever there's a need for it. So I am ready for questions and comments.
All right, Casper. Yeah, we'll jump into these questions. If you have a question, click on the Q&A icon, type it in, and click submit. With that, we're going to jump into one here from Dominic. Dominic's question is, with learner uploaded videos, do you monitor the content, or can anybody post what they want?
That's a good question. Of course, you have the risk that some dummy uploads something they really shouldn't have. We do not monitor everything that is uploaded as such, but in the platform, there is the ability to add the videos that you upload to certain groups and certain channels. For that to happen, there is a channel moderator who will have a look at it, and they will monitor and say, all right, yes, I agree that this is relevant and it's the quality it should be, but no, we don't. We sort of hope that people won't really upload something really offensive, but we also think that there are probably mechanisms in place that will sort of stop it if someone does it. Hopefully someone will flag it, which is possible. You can flag content, but no, we don't look at every single video. I think that's counterproductive, but maybe some lawyer someday will prove me wrong because we did make a mistake, but we don't.
All right, perfect. We're going to move on to the next one here. And this one, we had a couple kind of come in along the same lines, but this one here specifically is from Barbara. How much learning analytics do you do, and how do you build a suitable learning analytics dashboard? And what are some of the major challenges here in this space?
That's a really good question, Barbara. And I guess there are multiple. I think one of the biggest challenges are really skills. And that's something I've noticed, that the skills needed yesterday are not the same skills needed tomorrow in the L&D space. We used to need a lot of instructional design skills. We needed people who knew about learning. We needed IO people. And we still do, but today we also need data analytics people. Unless you're lucky enough to have someone who happens to be interested in data statistics, data analytics, you're not going to get very far, or if you are, it's going to take a long time, because there really is a lot to learn about this topic. So I think that was probably the biggest challenge, finding people who knows both something about learning and development, but also either have an interest or actual skills in that data analytics space. When it comes to building the dashboard, I think a lot of it really has to do with centralizing the data so that you don't have to look in 8 different dashboards. That's your first step, is trying to centralize the data that you get into one place. And then, of course, choosing which KPIs are the important ones is also, as always, really important. You want to be careful what you measure your success on, because people tend to try and improve those numbers. And so if they're the wrong numbers, they'll improve the wrong thing. So, but I think centralization of your data and dashboards, at least for us, was important. We really truly had like 6, 7 different dashboards. And what that meant is that you couldn't, on an ongoing basis, really sit down and say, all right, here's the overview. Because of what I'm seeing here in terms of data, I'm going to make this decision and that decision or this decision. So making it simple, centralizing it, and then figuring out what's the most important will allow you to very regularly look at the data. And that's when you begin to become data-driven, in my opinion, is when you actually look at it all the time, which doesn't happen if you have to look at 7 different things. And even if you do look at 7 different things, it's difficult to juxtapose the data points next to each other and try to make head and tails of it. So I hope that gives some input at least.
All right. We're going to move on to the next one here from Susan. Susan's question is, how did you recognize and reward the champions of social learning?
Oh, recognize and reward the champions of social learning. I'm not even sure that we really do anything. Well, we do for social learning. There are a couple of different channels that we have. For example, we have our video channel. We also have our internal social network. We do have a blogosphere, as we call it, where people can blog. And within those disparate systems, we do allow people extra access at times. So if you're a blogger who is really very popular, or a video tuber who is really putting out a lot of content, we will sometimes allow you to run your own channel and give you extra access in those systems. But beyond that, we actually don't reward that much. And I think a lot of those champions, they find intrinsic value in doing it. So in other words, it feels good to share what you know, and I think a lot of people are driven by that. Also, of course, they'll get followers and likes and that sort of thing. So that a lot of the time, the systems and platforms themselves have built some type of, I don't want to call it gamification, that may blurry the waters, but some motivators are built in to the platforms, just like in Facebook. You are motivated to post because you will get likes, and likes feel good, right? So some of the same things are in place for our systems, and the systems of many vendors also have these little nudges built into them that will motivate people to post. But we haven't really done anything that I can think of to truly reward those champions of social learning. Although maybe we should. It's a good idea to really drive that, because you're right, of course, that is so valuable to get that user-generated content, and that employee-driven learning is sometimes much more valuable than whatever we can do. Sometimes.
Okay. We're going to go on to this next one here from Tamara. Tamara's question is, what did you identify as your greatest opportunity after mapping your ecosystem and your future needs?
Our biggest opportunity was the learner experience. We have not been good enough, in my opinion, to focus on the learner and making it a good experience for the learner. We have also not been quick enough to accept the fact that a lot of people simply prefer to learn from external sources. We had this idea that whatever we made was the best. We also had this idea that leadership or project management or sales had to be done in a very certain and specific way for everyone. And for that reason, we could not allow you to learn about sales or leadership or project management anywhere but inside of Siemens. We've changed that approach, and we now know and realize people are different. There are more than one ways to skin a cat or sell a wind turbine. Even if some standards still need to be in place, we realize some processes are too important to just approach in a million different ways, but other processes are not. So we now allow for YouTube, TED Talks, all sorts of free and open content from the web to become part of our learning resources. So I think those two are the most important things: the learning experience, making the user interface nicer, focusing on trying to look at the individual in that experience, and then allowing for external content.
All right, Casper, thank you so much. We're going to move on to our next question here from Diane. Diane's question is, what kind of reporting and metrics do you do with your stakeholders, and how did you move them away from traditional thinking around L&D?
So in many cases, so my stakeholders, when I think about my stakeholders, I have them, obviously very many places. I have them in my management team. I have them as my learners. I have them as my colleagues. When it comes to the traditional approach to learning, some of it actually stemmed from inside our learning organization. There were people in our organization who, and still to this day, have the opinion that some of what we're doing is not the right way. And so, again, what I think was important was really to involve them and listen, and then give people an opportunity to shape what we're doing. I think that's something I've learned, that give people an opportunity to be part of it, and give them a voice and make it possible for them to shape this future, and it becomes a lot easier to manage that change, because people feel like they're part of it. Whenever we try to push something on people, it gets pretty difficult. Um, Besides from that, a change like this is in many ways a positive change for almost anyone involved. There are very few people for whom there are downsides to this. There are a few of them could be around cost. There are some costs related to doing things like that, especially if you want an additional platform. But on the other hand, if you get, let's say, a learning experience platforms which has included in it maybe thousands of free learning pieces of content, maybe you can save some money on the production that you do yourselves. So even those business cases seem pretty easy, and in many ways this is a positive change for many. So we truly did not have that many problems with this approach. And then to the second part of your question related to metrics, can you repeat that again? What was that? I don't know if you're still there. I'm trying to.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, it was just asking what metrics and whatnot you're sharing with your stakeholders, is what it was there.
What we're sharing then. Primarily, we try to share what we think is important, and what we primarily think is important are the results that will be seen out there in the business. So what we try to share are things like what we believe are returns on investments for different programs. So we do deploy talent development reporting principles. Some Kirkpatrick, some Phillips stuff happens as well, and so that we find to be very important. Obviously, we also look at engagement with these new platforms and with this new ecosystem. So we like to report on usage of the platforms. So, for example, in February month, we had 80,000 people log into this, and they did this and this and that. So that type of usage data we still find important. We are reducing the amount of satisfaction rating reporting that we're doing. So we're looking much more at engagement and return on investment and results than satisfaction, which we were very focused on in the past.
All right, perfect. Thank you, Casper. We got time for a couple more. So we have one here from Christy, and Christy's just wanting to know about how long has it taken your organization to get to this point where you're at today?
Well, some of it happened a while back. We're still in the process. We're not done. It's hard to say when you start and when you end this, but I want to say about a year and a half. When we look at some of the major components, and when we started looking at this and thinking like this, is about a year and a half ago, and we are, like I said, not done, but we are, doing well, I think.
Okay, perfect. We got time here still, so this one's going to come from Richard. Richard's question is, do you address user learning styles to optimize content and learning transfer?
That's a good question. I believe we do. I believe that our learning experience platform at some point either asks you your preferred method, or it certainly, I'm pretty sure it does have a look at how users interact with content. So for example, if the learning experience platform notices that you again and again and again choose videos over blog posts, it will begin recommending more videos and less blog posts to you because it thinks that you prefer videos. So obviously you can already now presumably hear that there are pitfalls with an approach like that. But yes, we try to address those different learning styles, but we also try to do that in a scalable way using AI or questionnaires that are, sort of automated. We also then, so an earlier point, we measure the usage of each delivery type, and by doing that, we can see what's popular. And then, of course, if we've noticed, like many others, that, for example, video is very popular, and so when we see that, we assume, well, that must be because people like it, so we do more of it. So yeah, we try to focus on that, but not in the old school way, which is not necessarily old school, but we don't focus on the classic approach of saying, well, some people are kinesthetic, some people like to see things, some people need to hear it. That approach is still present in our instructional design mindset, but not in the ecosystem mindset as such.
Okay, great. We had a bunch of them actually come in around this next, kind of the same idea again. But the question is, what are some examples of LXPs? So we had probably about 4 or 5 people ask
Yeah.
the same type of question.
If you're interested in LXPs, I would first of all Google Learning Experience Platform. Then I would see if I could find the Wikipedia page for it. That's how I learned about it, and that's how I learned about a lot of technology. Wikipedia is where I go for definitions of AI. I like to learn the basics of these technologies before I go and talk to vendors, so that I can evaluate them a little bit better. If you want some examples, I would look at Edcast, so edcast.com. I would look at Degreed, simply spelled DEGREED.com. I think those two are probably the most successful, at least. And then more broadly, though, the learning experience improvements are happening across the spectrum of technology, which means that everyone is talking about it. If you have Saba or Cornerstone or SumTotal as your LMS, and you talk to one of your salespeople from that organization today, they will say that they do learner experience and AI. Some of them do, some of them are just saying it because it's the hot new thing to say. If you have a off-the-shelf e-learning provider, they will say they do it. If you have a micro-learning partner, they will say they do it. But if we're talking about the core learning experience platforms, those are Degreed, Edcast, are the two most prevalent. Fuse as well. I may have missed some, but those are the ones that I really think you should look at.
Okay, perfect. Well, that's going to be all the time we have, Casper. So I want to take the time to thank you for taking your time to be with us today. I also want to thank everybody in the audience for their participation. We had a ton of questions. Unfortunately, we were not able to get to them all. We do have those recorded, however. I also want to thank our sponsor today at Oracle. Learning management solutions like Oracle Learning enable you to prepare your talent for the future. So thanks to Oracle for sponsoring today's Spotlight webinar. Again, thank you, Casper, and everybody on the line listening today. We will see you all back here for our next CLO webinar, which will take place tomorrow at 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific, titled Cracking the Code to High Potentials. Thanks again, everybody, and have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.